G'day everybody, it's Danny from Board Game Sanctuary, and when it comes to playing board games, I think I'm a pretty big loser. In fact, I think I lose about 75% of the games that I've played. I can't even remember the last time I won a game. Well, in this video, we are going to be looking at interesting board game designs, ones that reveal to players whether they're pulling ahead or falling behind, and catch-up mechanisms that games include into their gameplay itself to try and even the game out and keep the tension right up until the very end of the game. So move the provost 3 spaces down the road to block your access to the 3 buildings that will produce you the most important resources in the game. I like this feeling. It feels like winning. And this, my friend, is where you've probably gone astray. After we've activated all the buildings on the road, I'm going to trade a lot of my resources in to gain the favor of the monarch, which allows me to steal that character tile that allowed you to move the provost those extra spaces. I then am going to build a monument on top of my residence, which gives me 20 victory points immediately. So yeah, I think the feeling of winning is pretty good. When you make the perilous decision to sit down and play a board game with a group of family or friends, there are 3 ways the game can end up. Either people winning, losing, or in a fight. When it comes to losing at board games, there's lots of ways to bounce back from that. First thing I like to do is to discuss with my opponent their playstyle and the strategies and the avenue that they took to find their pathway to victory. By understanding some of the crucial decisions that they made throughout the game really helps to motivate me and allows me to learn some of the crucial moves that I need to make to adjust my gameplay. Also discovering the different strategies that a game has to offer. Employing one particular approach or vying for one particular scoring condition and then changing my strategy and what I'm vying for in the next game is really valuable for allowing me to see what pathways I can take in order to win my next game. I also love the competitive drive that a game has to offer. You know, losing at a game by a very close margin really fuels my motivation to want to play that game again and try and better my previous score that I achieved in the last game. That competitive nature is what really makes games so exciting. It's like watching a really tense action movie, and as you head to the climax of the action movie and trying to, you know, see how these characters are going to resolve this really tricky situation is something that can be applied to board games where the game feels like it progresses through 3 different acts that as you reach the climax, you can see how you went astray or how you actually secured a win. The last thing I like to do is to familiarize myself with all of the different options in the game. Every decision that you make in a game is a turning point, a branching point, a potential room for making errors throughout the game. If I can optimize the decisions that I make and analyze whether the choice that I'm making in the situation that the board is currently in is the best choice for me, then I'm really going to enhance the way that I play, the way that I think, and the way that I execute the moves throughout my game. And this, my friends, brings me to one of the most crucial elements in a board game, showing players how far they've progressed throughout a game. Progress is a huge factor for determining whether you're winning or losing and how far you're losing behind the winning player. Whether it be using a victory point track and calculating the number of victory points a player is ahead by, or whether it's satisfying a certain number of victory conditions or objectives in a game. Progress kind of feels like, you know, when you're playing Super Mario World and you progress to World 3, Level 2, you can really see how far you've gotten into the game. Or whether it might be a game of Street Fighter where the health bar tells you how many health you've got left for your character before the round ends. Knowing your progress and giving players that feedback on the progress really helps you to evaluate your current standpoint in the game. When it comes to showing how well a player is progressing throughout a game, different board games approach this feedback quite differently. The first type of game I want to talk about is known as the marathon style game, which usually involves a racetrack, players working against each other, trying to get to a common destination first, and whoever does it most efficiently is declared the winner of the game. Games like Lewis and Clark, where players are using workers to race to explore a trail which spans along this river, across the mountains, and whoever gets to Fort Clatsop first or gets furthest past the fort first wins the game. And this all comes down to who can manage the resources the best, who can then use those resources and the specialty cards most effectively and efficiently to race as quickly as possible. Then you've got games like Steampunk Rally, where players are building different engines using engine parts and then using dice to power those engines. And there's different types of dice in the game, like heat dice and steam dice and electric dice that power your vehicles along. And if you can do that most efficiently without taking too much damage, you're going to be able to progress along the racetrack better than the other players. And this game, The Quest for El Dorado, a Dominion-style deck-building game where players are racing across different types of terrain, which is based on how well they can build their deck, by navigating the different terrains more efficiently than the other players, and sometimes blocking them off at particular junctions on the way, can really make for a really competitive experience. One that's really fun, really tight, quite creative in terms of how you're going to compose your deck to do the things that you want it to do. You can either use them to buy more cards or buy specialty cards that will help you to give you an advantage over the other players. That visual reference of seeing where your player is on a linear scaled map means that you can determine how far you are ahead or how far behind you are from the other players. The next group of board games that I want to talk about are ones where the winner and the losers are revealed at the very end of the game. And there's a key reason why a lot of these board games choose to go along this route. And that is because that hidden information about how far each player has progressed throughout the game means that the tension and the suspense level throughout the game remains high until that very final reveal. And a lot of deduction games often use this kind of progress mechanic, where you know how far you've progressed, but the other players don't know how far into the game you might have gone. In the game like Cryptid, where everyone has a piece of the puzzle and all players are trying to find the location of the cryptid monster first, this game does it so beautifully well. What looks colourful and a little bit dry and abstract is actually a really great thinky puzzle, where you place your little count or place this pawn on a particular location, you ask a player a question, and based on their response to that question, you narrow down the location of this monster. It is a beautiful game which is orchestrated in such an intelligent way. It just creates for this aha moment, and it feels like, you know, when you put that final piece in a 1,000 piece puzzle and you finally see the full picture, this game does that well. And this hidden winner reveal style mechanism also occurs in games like Mysterium, which is a Cluedo/Dixit style game where players are trying to solve a murder by using vision cards that are given by the ghost of the victim, and players are trying to narrow down the culprit, the location, and the murder weapon that was used. And there's this beautiful final round where players have to use a final set of illustrated cards to determine who the actual person was and where it happened and the story that unfolded behind it. Some board games show you how far you're losing in far more aggressive ways. Games like Ticket to Ride, where players are making connections and connecting routes and destinations, the visual nature of the board and seeing it kind of evolve, grow and cluster and stretch out over time, kind of like someone stretching out in a lounge chair, just really shows how far you're losing or winning. The victory point track around the edge of the board is also another gauge of how well players are doing. If someone is 20 points in front of you, then you're going to have to do some serious legwork in order to connect those cities together and hopefully draw some more destination cards to swing the game back in your favor. And what I think is beautiful about Ticket to Ride is the fact that there's lots of different ways to score. You're going to score by the length of the train tracks that you're making, or you're scoring based on the different route cards you manage to randomly draw at the end of the game and manage to connect them together. Different games like this really provides players with so many different ways to get to where they need. The next game type that I want to touch upon are ones where there is a secret objective and a public objective. By introducing a balance of both public and secret goals means that there's a level of uncertainty and predictability when it comes to approaching different situations. Players often travel through these games with a sense of trepidation. Do they contribute to the collective effort, or do they try and satisfy their own desires and own goals? Dead of Winter, which is kind of like Walking Dead the board game, is a beautiful demonstration of this very fact. There's a common goal where all these survivors are trying to work together, but each player has a secret objective, and some of these secret objectives have the word betrayal on it, where that player needs to satisfy that win condition so that they win and the other players lose. If their secret objective doesn't have that keyword on it, they're trying to work together as a group. So there's always that sense that someone in the group is trying to sabotage the rest of the group so they don't get to their final goal because of their own greedy desires. And that introduces a huge, interesting undercurrent that flows throughout the game. What players think they're doing is progressing in the game is actually helping out a single player. The degree into which players can access certain resources, action tiles, and also particular bonus effects really reshapes the landscape of the game. If a player has access to multiple action tiles, that gives them better options, better resources, and a more efficient way of getting those resources, then that player is going to really break out into the lead. And this is a disparaging gap when it comes to losing at board games. Sitting there and witnessing someone else with a better engine, better way of getting resources, and things that you actually want in your engine is a little bit frustrating sometimes to watch. Quite often when I reflect on a board game experience, usually I lose because I make a suboptimal move or I don't respond to someone else's progress at the game effectively to try and stop them from running away. A lot of games do have a catch-up mechanic that tries to balance the game out. And you don't want to invest your time in a 3-hour game only to know that by hour 1 you've already lost the game and there's 2 hours left to go. Isle of Skye is a board game that has an interesting catch-up mechanism. In Isle of Skye, players are expanding their clan's kingdom by purchasing and selling tiles. Think of Carcassonne with a little bit of an auctioning element to it. Players are trying to build their map and satisfy a range of objectives at the same time. Now, what's really interesting about the catch-up mechanism here is that from round 3 onwards, however many players are in front of you on the victory point track, you're going to get a certain amount of coins. So for example, in round 5, if there are 2 players' pawns in front of you on the victory point track, you're going to get $6 in your pocket. At first, you might think that this game is rewarding players for poor decision making, but actually in a game like this, which is driven by economy, it's really hard to gauge how much things are going to be worth. And this is a really cool integrated grading mechanism that helps to keep things really tight, where towards the end of the game, players who are falling far behind have a chance to win the game. And that creates for some really cool, tense moments of, oh, there's a really big tile that I need that will complete this route or this terrain and satisfy that final objective, and I'll have enough coins to outbid maybe the winning player. Games like Suburbia also do this really well, and if you haven't played Suburbia, it's basically a tile drafting game where players are building a city using these hexagonal tiles and they're placing them in these boroughs to create income, increase population and reputation. And as players increase their population, which kind of acts as the victory points in this game, it's kind of thematically linked to the idea that as your city grows, the reputation of your city is going to decrease because the city's getting overcrowded. So every time a player passes this red line, they're going to reduce their income and reputation by 1 level. This little balancing mechanism, as you can see, as you get further and further up the victory point track, the red lines become more and more frequent. This creates an interesting way for other players to kind of keep up with the leading player. And I like how in Suburbia they've tried to link this in a real-world sense. Quacks of Carcassonne is one of my favorite games. It's one of those bag building games where you draw out little ingredients and then put them in your pot, hoping that your pot doesn't explode. The rat's tail mechanism in this game is an interesting way to keep things really nice and tense. What happens is, the players who are falling behind the furthest player get to place their rat token out into their pot equal to the number of rat tokens that are between their victory point markers on the victory point track. So if I was in second place and the person was in first place and there were 3 rat tails between us on the victory point track, I'd be able to place my rat token 3 spaces away from my droplet token, giving me a little bit of a head start, making my pot feel a little bit fuller, giving me a little bit of an advantage so I can keep up with the leading player. Kemet is a pretty aggressive miniatures game where players are trying to bid and buy power tiles to help leverage their troops in order to attack other players in order to gain victory points. What I think is really good about Kemet in terms of how it balances that runaway leader effect is it first of all introduces politics, where different players might decide to band together to focus on a player that's in the lead, but also the player who has the least amount of victory points and is falling behind gets to determine the turn order for the subsequent round. And that might mean knowing what the player is going to do next with their pyramid powers, or knowing what an opponent has in terms of their combo tiles and trying to determine the play order about who's going to get those power tiles in the next round, or trying to leverage their troops before a player can attack them by pushing themselves further in front in turn order. The power to manipulate the turn order if you're losing the game really helps to keep things even. What do you think about losing in board games? Are you someone who wins a lot, loses a lot, or you don't care either way? I'd love to hear about your board game experiences in the comments section below. Thank you once again for making it so far with me in this video. If you really appreciate the really cool content that I release and share with you guys, please don't forget to head over to my Patreon page and support Board Game Sanctuary over there. Otherwise, consider giving us a like and a subscribe, and I look forward to bringing you some more awesome board game content soon from the land down under. See you later, guys. Bye!